Welcome to Secure Talk, a podcast for security news, innovation, and excellence. Secure Talk is hosted by Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Justin has a 20-year career in technology, innovation, and startups.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Secure Talk. This is your host, Justin Beals. I'm always glad to have you joining us. Today, we have an exceptional guest. I'm very excited to chat with him. Chris Hadnagy is the CEO of Social Engineer, LLC, and he has written a number of books on social engineering and really one of the foremost experts in this particular space. The one that I've had a chance to really delve into recently is Social Engineering, the Science of Human Hacking. Chris, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate being here.
So one of the things that we love to chat with, we have a lot of early in career listeners, and we kick off our conversations this way, is we'd love a brief introduction about yourself, and specifically, how did you get interested in security or computer science? You know, what were those formative experiences? Yeah.
I wish I had an Elon Musk story or something, that made me look really smart, but it's like a series of really dumb mistakes that led me to something great. But I would say my first love, I always liked computers. And my father was an early adopter of computers, like way back when there was not even hard drives, and he was an accountant. And I remember his very first computer was $7,000, and he was bragging to his friends that when he hits this button, all your taxes will be done in 45 minutes. And they were marveled at 45 minutes, right? Can you imagine waiting 45 minutes now? And I had a Commodore 64 and I was programming things. I just got interested in it. And I went to my very short stint in college I was in for computer programming, and modems had just come out, and I had written what today would be called a war dialer. But I was a phone freaker, and I was interested in how phones work. So I thought, well, if I can do that with like a whistle, I wonder if I can do it with a computer. So I played with different tones, not just a 2600 megahertz one, and by mistake used the tone that told the phone to shut itself off. But I didn't do it to just one phone. I threaded two 2400 baud modems together, and I ran a script for a couple hours, and I ended up shutting down Sarasota County's phone system. The police came to the college, and they were like, and there was no laws at the time, and they were like, "Hey, who did that?" I'm like, "That was me." They were like, "Why'd you do that?" I'm like, I was doing a test. I didn't even know that was the tone. They're like, "Okay, please don't do that again." And the college kicked me out, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. Like, this was amazing. So moving on down the road, I started working for a company called Defensive Security, and we were doing exploit writing and teaching and training. Amazing organization. I learned so much from them. And one of the main things I learned about myself was that I really stink at coding. I mean, really bad. But I was really good with people. So when we would have a pen test, I would go and try to do the phishing or the vishing or the physical entry. And I didn't understand why it was working. And that irritated me. So I wanted to understand it. So I started reading like all the books I have behind me on psychology and influence and persuasion and nonverbals. And then I would document. And that process is what became the social engineering framework that lives on social-engineer.org still. I put that out there 2009. And within a couple months, Kevin Mitnick's publisher had called me and she said, "I want you to write a book on that framework." And I said, no, like I'm not an author. And she goes, "No, but really, no one's ever done this. No one's ever classified science and psychology into social engineering. Please consider it." So I ended up writing that very first book, Social Engineering, the Art of Human Hacking. If you haven't read it, don't read it. It's very old, right? So it's not, the science one is the newer one. So definitely read that one. Okay. But that book is what, the long answer to your question, which I'm sorry, is that book is what led me to where I'm at right now. Because when that came out, companies started calling me and saying, "No one writes about this. Can you consult us? Can you come teach? Can you do this?" And then I wrote a class, and that class got I taught it to MI5 and MI6. I taught it to US SOCOM. I taught it to the FBI. I was at the Pentagon debriefing, which was mind blowing, right? That I was at the Pentagon debriefing on social engineering. And that opened my eyes that this could be a job, a career. So I started Social Engineer LLC in 2010. And never looked back, and this is what I've been doing now since then.
That's really exciting. Well, a couple of things definitely resonate for me. I still have my old copies of Hacker Quarterly 2600. I remember the old war dialing days, and one of my first jobs was programming AT commands for Hayes modems for British telecoms from back.
We're old, aren't we? So, we're old. We're old now.
Yeah.
For you youngins listening to this, you even know what that is, do you? No.
But it was a brand new world, wasn't it? You were like, oh, the interconnectedness is this, and I have this, like a Commodore 64 was such a powerful computer. And you could really reach out and touch a lot of systems with something like that. Yeah.
For its time, it was amazing.
Really cool. Yeah. Certainly, programming is its art form, right? Like you have to be in the practice to be good at it, and you're doing it daily. And if my job as a CEO, I'm far enough away from it that they won't let me touch the GitHub anymore.
Yeah, I get that. My team does the same thing. Chris, just tell us what you want. Don't touch it. We'll do it.
Yeah. One of the things that I kind of learned as I was reading about your work and reading your book and reading about your company is that you've been deeply involved in red team activities for a long, long time. Yeah. And certainly, I think different organizations add red team activities to their companies at different times along the journey as the company's growing. And, I've talked to friends that are working at banks and they're running a full-time staff. But what do you think about from a red team activity for mid-tier companies and smaller companies that certainly are probably a target?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question because I got into red teaming before what normal people call red teaming, what they think it is today, right? So if we go back, our days, red teaming wasn't a thing you did in 24 hours or 48 hours or 4 days. Red team, when you got hired for a red team, you were a month, 2 months, 3 months, right? And they hired you to simulate the adversary, to make believe you were a nation state or a competitor. So we would stalk the guys. We would take pictures. We would follow them to the gym. We would go out to their locations and tag their cars. We would, go to their homes and make believe we were repairmen. We would get involved in their life and such. I had a job once where I got hired by the company for 2 weeks, right? I actually got a job and I went inside to see if I can be an insider threat. And I, had an office and a computer and everything, an RFID of all of a fake ID. And I got hired and I sat in their office for 2 weeks. The people just assumed I was an employee. And then I'm packing my box up after I completely own the company. Like I'm quitting, I'm leaving. And the guys are like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, today's my last day. They're like, well, we got to take you out for lunch. And I had a company bought lunch, like this. These things were months long. So, okay, so that doesn't really answer your question, but I wanted to define that because what we call red teaming today, people will call a pen test a red team, and it's not. It's a completely different thought. When you ask that question, I think, well, when a company comes to me and says, do you think I need this? I say, what are you protecting? And if you can answer that clearly and then tell me, who were you afraid of taking it? Right? If your fear is only, let's say, online threat actors from the dark web, then maybe you don't need a physical entry red team. But if you're worried about insider threat, if you're worried about somebody coming in from another nation or another area or competitor actually trying to infiltrate your physical network, and regardless of your size, you need. I've done red teams for companies that were 150 people, but they were making pharmaceutical things that were going to change the world, right? And I've done red teams for companies that have 200,000 people, everything in between, and it just depends on what you're protecting and how badly you're worried about it getting lost.
Yeah. Very true on the, what are our crown jewels? Why are we trying to hold on it? And who are the threat actors that are coming after it to help decide what the value is? And certainly to your point, we see small companies that are building, very valuable solutions that would be useful on a black market or from an information perspective. And so it's not always just the most massive companies that need to think about that. And certainly, so now I'm drilling in a little bit. Scope is always really important to me as a product leader. And so one of the things that are going to help us define the scope on the red teaming work is what are we protecting and who's coming after it?
Yeah. And for us, and I'm sure it's the same in your business, scope is our Bible. I tell my team, we never, ever break scope. So it is my job. I feel if I was sitting with you as a prospective client, I need to ask you, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I mimic your employees? Can I actually enter your network? Can I steal something? Can I send a phish? Can I do a vish? Can I record all that stuff? Every question has to be asked, because if you were thinking one thing and I was thinking another and I do the thing that's not written in scope, poof. And especially when it gets to these physical jobs, because this is, I mean, I've been in some hairy situations, like guns pulled on me and stuff in these red teams. So you need to be prepared and have everything laid out so you don't get stuck in a situation that can be really dangerous.
Actually, that was one of the areas I was curious about. There's an ethics to
Yes.
doing this the right way. And you certainly talked about communicating effectively what's in scope. What are some of the other ways that you think about the ethics of this particular practice?
Yeah, I actually love this question. Thank you for asking this, Justin. One of the things I've noticed in the industry that has kind of been disturbing me is that people say, well, because we're simulating the adversary or the threat actor, that means I should do everything they do. And that's not true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because my philosophy is, like, if I'm working with your company, I want you to love me and I want you to retain me for years to come. But you're not going to do that if I make your people feel dirty or abused or violated. So I refuse to use pretext that elicit intense fear. Like, I'll give you an example. I heard a story of another red teamer who during COVID put a gas mask on to enter a company. And people were so afraid that she was thoroughly sick that they didn't even touch her. That's horrific if you think about that. Like, to use that level of fear during a global pandemic where millions of people were dying, that's not ethical, right? So I don't like those kind of stories. So we refuse to do that. I refuse to use pretext that will threaten someone's job. I have no clue where you are in your life. And what if this last week you had a bad divorce and you're in millions of bills and you were thinking of ending it all? And now I come in and I threaten your job. I don't want that liability. No. When it comes to phishing emails, you see these things where they use someone's bonuses. Terrible. So for me, to sum it up, ethics, you have to think about how your attack is going to affect the target. And if that attack could affect, and every attack is going to leave someone feeling a little bit bad, but I do not want psychological trauma or harm or the feeling of hopelessness in my targets. I want them to have the opportunity to stop me. It doesn't mean I make it easy, right? We don't make it easy on them, but I don't want someone to feel like their life, their job, their family is over just because of my testing, right? I wouldn't want someone to do that to me, so I would not do that to someone else.
Yeah. In an adversarial approach, it's really hard to humanize the adversary sometimes, but we are humans on both sides of this work. And the goal here, I think what you're trying to deliver is better security by learning where the vulnerabilities might lie that are being tested.
I'll give you an example if you'll let me. So we were doing a test for a company, and one of the targets that we found a slew of nude pictures of her. And they weren't revenge porn. They were artfully done. She had them taken when she was much younger, but then someone leaked them online.
Yeah.
Never use that. Ever. Like, that doesn't become part of the attack, but I also didn't ignore it. So what I did is we attacked the company a completely different way. After it was done, I said to my point of contact, I don't want to hand these links in to a whole male security team. Would you allow me? And I said, I won't charge you guys. Will you allow me to work with her privately to get those pictures taken off? And the reason I feel really strong about this is because they paid me to find vulnerability, and that's a vulnerability. So rightfully, they could have said, no, give us the links, right? And I said, but let me work with her. And if I can't get them removed, then I will report back to you. But will you? And they said, yeah, sure. I worked with her for 2 months. We got every one but one link to remove. The company said, we don't care. It was on some Czechoslovakian porn site on page 82 or something. And her name wasn't even attached to it. So they said, we don't care. You can ignore that one. But we got them all. And that to me is ethics, right? I see this and I would go, whoa, this is a major attack vector. But can you imagine the humiliation on her if afterwards she found out it was a company sponsored test and everybody in the company saw her naked? Oh my gosh. Like it would be violation, right? And I could not right away. And when that happened in the company, we limited the team that worked on that target to another female and me. And that was it. No one else saw those pictures. We told her that when we met with her, that we limited the team so that way she wasn't embarrassed by us. She wasn't embarrassed by her company, and those things never got used in an attack. I think it's really important if you're in this field that becomes a major point of focus for you, that you're really thinking about the ethics on how to do this so you don't leave people feeling worse for having met you.
I mean, I get a sense of caring for the people that, you're trying to engineer a social outcome for. You certainly understand the impact of the work you're doing, and that it can be hard to learn that you make a mistake. And at the same time, you can, in this digital age, you can learn of things that they're not even aware of that are out there.
That's a great way of putting it, because really ask yourself this question if you're in this industry: why are you here? If your answer first is money, or because it's cool, or I want to look awesome, that's the wrong reason, right? I'm in this industry because I really like helping people. And this is a talent I have to help people. So if I go into my job every day with the goal of, I want to help this company be the best they can be, then I'm not going to do things that are going to harm them or make them feel angry, because you're not teachable, right? If you came up to me and said, Chris, I want to learn how to fight. Can you show me? And I go, sure. Bam. And I break your nose. You're like, well, you're the worst teacher on earth. I don't want to learn from you anymore. Right. So don't do that digitally to your targets, right? When they say, okay, teach me how to be secure, don't embarrass them in front of everybody, because they're not going to want to learn from you.
Yeah, you're going to close them off, right? They're going to 100%. Be like, this person hurt me. There's no way I'm open to working with them.
Exactly right. Yeah. And who would, right? I wouldn't. And I tell people this all the time. If you think about your family, you wouldn't do that to your children. If your child made a mistake, you wouldn't pull them out in front of a good parent, wouldn't pull them out in front of all their friends and humiliate them. This kid says, look how stupid he is. He made a mistake. Like, no one would do that to their kids. We hear that and we're like, that would be the worst parenting on earth. So why would you do that to your employees? Right? You just don't. Yeah. If you wouldn't do it to your kids, don't. And if you would do that to your kids, you probably shouldn't be a boss.
Well, it's refreshing to hear that you have a deep perspective on the ethics of the work. And it's the criticism that I've had of, I think, our industry a lot of times, both business and technology. We don't think very often about the impact of what we're doing. And there is always an impact, right? If you're automating something, someone may be losing a job. It may still be the work you're doing, but you just need to be aware of what those impacts are.
And I like that thought, because, anything that we do in this AI now, I'm not a believer that AI is going to replace all humans, but AI definitely is going to replace some jobs, right? I was able to successfully use ChatGPT to write a script that I needed for a tool that I was building, and I didn't need a human interaction. And all I had to do was learn how to talk to the bot to give me the right output. So as long as I can be a creative human, I didn't go anywhere to hire a programmer now. I did this. And then I even said, get fancy, build me a GUI. It built me a graphic user interface for this thing. I mean, ridiculous, right? So, I mean, yes, AI will produce that, but now I wouldn't want to go, okay, fire every programmer in my company because I have AI. Right. So, so that I like the way you worded that, because we do have to have that mind that technology and things are going to advance, and it's going to mean some bad things for some people, but how we word that and how we work with them can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. One thing that I learned in reading your book is that a lot of times you talk about this social engineering work that you're doing as a part of a broader penetration testing effort. As a CTO, I've always viewed penetration testing as something that we did in a very cybersecurity way. And we went through the list of the typical hacks and that the patches are in place and you've got the right encryption. But I loved including this idea because you have a surface area, right?
Yeah.
How do you introduce that conversation of social engineering as a part of the broader penetration testing work?
I say, have you read the Verizon DBR report? Have you seen the scattered spider hack on MGM? If you read the Verizon DBR report, then you saw that 96% of all ransomware is being delivered by phishing emails. You're seeing that phishing is becoming the number 2 vector for getting ransomware and Trojans installed on networks. So how can you do a pen test or an adversarial simulation and not include social engineering? Because you're leaving out a major vector. Your firewall may be perfect. Your IDS, IPS, your intrusion systems may stop every attack that I can launch from a digital perspective. But if I can get someone inside the IT team to allow me in, because I sent them a phish and to send me a reverse shell, well, now all that technology doesn't do anything for you. So how do you completely understand your vulnerability and your threat risk if you don't include social engineering in your adversarial simulations?
I mean, some of the statistics that blew me away as I was starting to research the space that we operate in was that 70% of breaches were coming through third-party vendors. To your point, how much of this is human engineering, because it is not that difficult to set up a firewall. It's not that difficult to set up a way to connect in an encrypted fashion to critical systems. And of course, when those are breached, it's catastrophic. It's a big loss. But the ransomware install is coming through people. We have a thing at our company where it's like you've passed the first 24 hours is when you're going to get an SMS. as someone posing as
Yep.
the CEO
Yep.
to ask you to provide them information.
Happens at my company too. Soon as someone goes on LinkedIn and says, I started with social engineer, I tell them, you're going to get a text from me. It's not going to be from me. And they're going to ask you to go to CVS and get some gift cards. And the only reason I know that is because one of my employees fell for it a couple of years ago. So we ended up having to say, okay, guys, this is going to happen every time we hire someone. So just, be aware.
Yeah. And it's these communication patterns that don't require a login. And from physical through to SMS to email, there's just no authentication to be on that platform for communication.
And if the pretext is believable, right? So for this particular attack on my company, I was in a classroom with students. I was with some clients. And I had told my EA, who was brand new, hey, I'm not going to be able to talk to you today for very much because I'm in a classroom with a bunch of students and clients. So I'm going to be busy. I don't know if they knew that I was teaching a class because they did OSINT on my schedule because it's online, but they texted her and said, hey, this is Chris. I'm in the class. I need you to go get me some gift cards for students. Mm-hmm. She was like, okay, well, he just told me he was there. I don't recognize this number, but it all makes sense. So she goes out $2,000 later. Right. And then I get back to the office and she's like, so did you get the gift cards? And I'm like, you're joking, right? Like you're tell me you're just pranking me as your first day prank. And now you can see the fear, right? She's like, wait. And I'm like, oh crap. No. I'm like, you did it. I was like, how much? She's like 2,000. I'm like, oh, ouch. This hurts. Right. It happens. Right. I mean, we didn't fire her. We didn't do anything. We just said, okay, this is a good learning lesson. So let's see how we can learn from this and move on.
Well, and to the title, social engineering, we are human creatures. We can be engineered. I oftentimes, when coaching software development teams, I'm like, oh, this is a human engineering issue. We need to coach this person on how to be successful. And therefore, we're all susceptible, myself and everyone else, to being influenced. Could you take us through just maybe briefly or at a high level, your pyramid, OSN, pretext, attacks? Yeah. I thought it was super helpful for me in understanding how these attacks get perpetrated.
So the life force of every social engineering attack is information. So OSINT has to be the biggest block of thing that you do, right? Because OSINT will generate your pretext. OSINT will generate your attack vectors. OSINT will tell you, is phishing better than vishing? What kind of software do they use? What kind of exploits might I be able to employ? Are they big on social media? All these questions get answered with OSINT. So that has to be the very first stage. After you do OSINT, that's when you start attack planning. So you actually look at your OSINT and you say, okay, what's my goal? So I know my end goal. Let's say my end goal was penetration of the network and owning of some data, right? So I have to get into this section of, I have to get admin access on the network. Okay, now I have the OSINT, so what's going to give me that access? So I need to start planning my attacks. I'm going to do phishing here, spear phishing here, vishing there. I'm going to do some network intrusion here. I'm going to start doing all of that stuff. Once I plan the attack, now it's actually launching the attacks. So I start to launch those attacks because once you're planning, sometimes you're planning an attack and you're like, I need to change this. Because as you're planning it, maybe the OSINT changes or something else happens, or this has happened to us a number of times. We find a piece of data that tells us in 2 days there's something happening that we have to use. So forget the timeline, like get going quick on this one thing. We'll do more OSINT later, but you got to do the attack on this one thing, right? And then once you launch the attacks, then of course it's data collection, achieving the goal, and report writing. And I got to stress, even though that's the smallest section, it is the most important thing. And every young person who I ever mentor and talk to, your clients are not paying you to be cool and to hack them, even though you might think they are. They're not paying you to hack them. They're paying you for that report. So that report better be solid, and it better not be a copy paste of every piece of OSINT. It better tell a story, and it better explain to them the thought process, what you did, how you did it, what worked, what didn't work. Tell them where you failed. Tell them where they stopped you. That report better be, if it's going to be long, which most SE reports are, it better be a storybook that they can't put down, because that's what the money is for. That money is for that report, and then your mitigation steps afterward.
Certainly, you talk about in the book that the best defense, or one of the important defensive tactics around all of this, is understanding social engineering itself. And then to your point, that story about how I perpetrated the hacks that I was working on and what blocked me is a more precise story about your particular organization.
I love that. I mean, imagine if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, okay, you got cancer. Okay, see you later. And just walked out. You'd have, what type of cancer? Is it curable? Give me details. How did I get it? What stage is it at? You have a million questions. So if your report is this basic, like, okay, you guys we hacksaw you. You're leaving your client with a bill and they go, what did I just pay for? Right? So the bad guys can do that for free. They're asking us to show them in writing a report is that evidence that this is what we did and this is how you can fix it.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit, continue the discussion on this thread around those defensive measures that you might think about implementing. First off, let me just say that trying to defend against social engineering seems incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
You can take the number of people you have, how unique you are, multiply it by the number of hacks, and it's going to
hurt your head.
Yeah. So how do you think about developing a defensive posture around social engineering?
Yeah, that's a really wonderful question. So I have a couple tiers that must take place when it comes to defense against SE. So first is you have to educate everybody about the vectors. And when the best way that I have found to do that is by actually performing safe real world attacks on your people. So phishing them, vishing them, smishing them, doing red teams, right? This lets the company know, oh, that's what it feels like when I get phished. Oh, that's how I should take care of it. And that's how I report this. By doing those regularly, you're building muscle memory. You almost think of it like going for a boxing lesson, right? They teach you they hit the bag, you hit the heavy bag. That way, if you're ever in a fight in a ring, your muscles should be like, oh, I know how to block. I know how to punch, right? I know what to do here. So that muscle memory is that education. That's the very first part. But sometimes companies go, well, we taught them, so they should be secure, right? No. Now there's tech that you have to install. I'm a big proponent for password managers. And people go, yeah, but they got hacked last year. Yeah, one of them did. Doesn't mean don't use them, right? Because I can't remember the thousands of passwords that I have to remember. And if I have to remember them, they're either going on paper or I'm coming up with a pattern. So password manager, MFA on everything that you can possibly have MFA. And if you can avoid a text and you can have an app, then that avoids SIM swapping, right? So you want to have MFA on everything. I know antivirus, it's a pain in the butt. You got to have it, right? You got to, because it's going to stop 99% of the known viruses that are out there. So people go, yeah, but it doesn't really do much. Yeah, it's not going to stop an O-day. Okay. But it's like get your vitamins, stay a little healthy because that's going to stop some of the viruses that are out in the world today, right? Get your immunity shots and you're better. Last but not least, having that internal security team that doesn't speak to your people like they're idiots, but that actually cares about them. You want them to be their advocates, not their adversaries. So if your team is not that, replace them. Get a new team. Because I have seen companies do a 180 because that team, I have a client right now, this team loves their people so much that when they do a test, they tell me that they'll call in and thank them. Man, I know I fell for it this month, but thank you. I learned so much. And I'm like, it's what I love about you because you care so much about your people. They're thanking you for phishing them. Right? Like that's amazing to me. So those four things I say, like, that's like maybe a starting script, but those are the things I say you have to do if you want to defend against SE.
Yeah. You had a phrase in your book that you mentioned that carrying the stupid humans approach is a non-starter to being an effective social engineering tester. And look, this is true. I've met a lot of engineers in my career, and this attitude that you don't understand what I understand makes you stupid is really a poor way to engage colleagues.
Terrible way, right?
Yeah.
And the bumper sticker that says there's no patch for human stupidity, first, that means that you think that only stupid humans can fall for SE. And second, if someone falls for SE, then they're stupid. And both of those attitudes are horrific in trying to fix the problem. Again, go back to your doctor. Imagine if your doctor came in and you had cancer and he goes, well, only people who have really poor health got cancer. Right? And you'd be like, ow, that hurts. Like, only people who do bad things with their health die from cancer. You're like, that's horrible. Like, don't do that, right? That would be a horrible doctor to have. So you don't do that to your people, right? I have fallen for an SE attack, a real one. And I've sent 19 million phishing emails in my career, and I've written 5 books on the topic. And this is what I do every day. And I fell for insider threat, and I've fallen for a phish. So honestly, and I'm not saying I'm anything special, but if I can do it, I think anyone can do it, right?
Yeah, because it's a very human response. We are all human beings. We are governed by the biology and chemistry that we have going on, our own aspirations, all the data we put on the internet for intelligence work. And we also typically, many of us want to connect with other people and have a positive experience. Yeah. It just makes you deeply vulnerable to those types of outcomes. So the other thing that I loved is it felt like to me being good at social engineering or as a security expert inside your organization also involved letting go of your ego, which is a big part of just doing social engineering, hard thing to do, to let go of who you are.
Very much so.
Practice.
Very much so. Actually, I learned that in the hard way, but it was a lesson that I think changed the nature of my company. When I realized that ego suspension was going to make me so much better at this job, it was like a light bulb moment, right? Because before that, I was one of those guys that always had to win, right? We were bragging about 100% win. And then I had a client say to me once, well, if you're always going to win, then what's the hope for me? Right? Like, what's the hope? And I started thinking, like, he's right. Like, what a terrible sales pitch. That, hey, give me $60,000 and you're going to lose. Like, who would do that? Right? It's like, like that's a horrible sales pitch. So I started thinking, like that's all ego driven. And when I was saying those things, it was about me, not about you as the client. So when I realized, okay, let me make believe I'm the client. I'm sitting across from Chris Hadnagy. And what do I want him to say to me? I want him to say that, hey, listen, we're going to work together until you're beating me so bad that I feel horrible about myself. That's what I want to hear, right? That I'm going to help train you to stop me, right? That's what I want to hear. And I'm like, okay, but that means I have to sit there and be willing to take the ego hit that I'm going to lose eventually, and not on purpose, but that I'm going to lose. And soon as I got used to, you got to lose the ego in this industry, because egos, they wreck everything. They wreck your relationships. They'll wreck your business. They'll wreck your employees. They'll wreck everything. And I've worked with too many people that their egos get in the way, and it just doesn't work for effective things. So I'm glad you pulled that point out. Mastering ego suspension, which is a lifetime learning lesson and a constant thing that you have to work on. It will change your business, but it will also change who you are as a communicator. It will make you so much of a better communicator. Really, it will.
I think it's almost impossible to be a great leader and to lead with your ego at the same time.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm so right and everyone else is so wrong, then it's going to be really hard to take input from my team and provide input in a way that they can digest and feel excited about, changing their own work or perspective or the outcomes.
I have this wonderful thing we talk about in the company that I had this woman we hired brand new to the industry. I mean, she was in hotel accounting before she worked for me. So nothing to do with cyber whatsoever. I mean, she doesn't have like a technical bone in her body, right? Now we're on this Vision client, and we had instituted something for this client where, like, kind of a human MFA, where they had a color of the day. And it wasn't something like yellow, blue. It was like, chartreuse green or something that was only on the intranet, and it changed every day. So if, as a tech support person, if I call you and I'm asking you questions, you're supposed to say to me, hey, what's the color of the day? And if I don't know it, you hang up. So the client said, wow, this has really been working great, but now we want to see if you can bypass your own protocol. So I'm sitting in the meeting with the team like, okay, guys, we got to come up with a plan. How are we going to do it? And this person who has zero experience in the industry gave the idea, right? She says, well, we don't even call about that. We call and we ask them some outrageous question. Like, you have some problem with the computer. I need your password. And when they reject it, you say, okay, no problem. I understand that's a weird question, but I need to log this. So what's the color of the day so I can log your rejection? We get it from one person, and then I give it to the team. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, do it. She did it. It worked. And then every day we're owning, we're bam, 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 bam. And I'm like, what? Now we got to come up with a fix to our broken thing that we fixed before, right? The client's like, see, I knew you were going to do it, but now how are we going to fix that? And I'm like, okay, there is an answer. The answer is only the person who initiates the call says the color of the day. Only. Yeah. And if the person who initiates the call ever asks for it, your team has to know to reject it. And that stops us now. But it's like, the point was, it was this brand new person. And if I was like, hey, look, you're not even in the industry. You don't have any ideas. So I'm not even going to invite you to this meeting, right? I'm going to get the guys here from the industry. I would have lost out on having this amazing idea from this person who's got zero experience and ended up owning the whole program because she figured it out, right? And I've been in the industry for 19 years? She just started and she had the answer. I didn't, right?
Sometimes it's that beginner's mind, right? The willingness to not know what the right answer is.
That's why I love it.
Another part of your book that I really enjoyed is I Can See What You Don't Say. And I'll confess that my school career, my academic career, is basically a degree in theater. We spent a lot of time saying, this is what the script says, but this is what you're really saying. And how do we say words that are oftentimes counter to the way our body needs to perform? And you talk a lot about nonverbal communication and the psychology of it. I'd just love for you to elicit a little bit on how critical it is to social engineering.
So I know that there's some who will put a percentage on it, but one of the things I learned, I had the wonderful privilege of my second book was written with Dr. Paul Ekman. He's a mentor of mine, a hero of mine. One of the things that he taught me in working with him was that you can't say it's 80%, 90%, 96% of what we say is nonverbal because it depends on the medium, right? So right now, you and I can only see from our chest up, which means you can see my hands if I'm using them. You can see my face, but you can't see my hips, my feet. You can't see much else, right? So you're stuck at not knowing all of my body language, right? You can assume I'm facing you because I'm facing the camera, but it could be the camera could be over here for one time, right? Anyhow, the point is that the percentage is more, regardless of what it is. If it's 50, 60, 70, 90 of what we say is on our face and our body language than the words that we're saying, right? And think of an example for that. You could say, wow, man, you're such a dummy, or man, you are such a dummy. And what's the difference with that? The same exact words. One of them's cute, right? Or you walk into your dog and you go, I'm going to kick you in the face, or I'm going to kick you in the face. The dog knows by the tone, doesn't understand the English words. By the tone, it says, oh, I'm in trouble. The other one, it goes, hey, he's going to pet me. He's going to love me. So the nonverbal piece of language where it's our tone, our facial expressions, our body language, the way that we're using our hands, the way our feet and hips are placed, learning to read these things can tell you during a social engineering engagement if you're actually doing good or not. And it also can make you a better social engineer, because when you're on the phone, the way that our body posture is, when you're doing vishing, the way that your face is will affect your voice. Right? A smile versus a frown, or if you're stressed and you're tense, having this kind of a tense face will change the tone of your voice, which will come across to the target, and then they feel tense. And they don't know why they feel tense, but they start to feel that. So understanding nonverbal communication to me as a life skill, not just social engineering, as a life skill, is something I wish we were teaching kids in school. I really do. I wish we were teaching them.
I certainly believe that when we're communicating with another human being, we interpret as truth the nonverbal cues. And then we layer like metadata, the verbal cues in a way.
100%.
It is like the true fundamental relationship that's happening.
And if you think about this, I usually, when I'm teaching a class, I'll ask women this. Have you ever been in a room where someone kind of creeped you out, but they didn't say anything? They didn't do anything. They didn't come near you. They didn't touch you, but you left it going, I don't really like that guy. I say, why? I ask them, why? Why do you do that? And they're like, I don't know, just the way that he made me feel. And I'm like, right. Because your body is constantly like a radar looking for signs for danger. And it's giving your brain is now saying, oh, there's a threat over here. Now, maybe you didn't identify what the threat was. Maybe he just leaned a little too close, or he looked at you weird, and your verbal, your visual caught it, but you didn't actually see it, right? It's just your brain is always looking and scanning. And now your brain is saying, hey, there's a threat over here. I don't want you going over this way. That nonverbal radar is so important to us. It's life-saving. It's life-saving. That's why my daughter, man, I taught her this stuff from when she was 3 years old. And now she's an expert. And I'm like, you need this in your life. You need to know how to do this, because this is not just about being a social engineer. She's an esthetician, right? But this is about just knowing how to communicate and how to keep yourself safe also.
You know, this whole conversation, when we have it, makes me incredibly comfortable about like, how am I holding my hands? Where are my shoulders at?
Everyone always says that when I'm talking about this, but it's perfectly fine. It really is.
What am I saying to people? I think being deeply aware of it, and even in the digital spaces, there are cues that we add to that email that we're sending out, the punctuation that we're putting around it, and of course, things like emoticons. That aren't a real word.
Why do we create emojis? Why? Think about it. If you read the science, some of the scientific research that's been done, emojis got so popular because we love expressing emotion in our communication. And it's like the same thing I said before, like, I'm going to kick you in the face, or I'm going to kick you in the face. Well, between an anger face or a smiley face, you know that I'm joking or I'm not joking. But you send that same text with no emoticon, and guess what? I don't know. Is he mad at me? Is he not? I'm not really sure what's happening here. So I'm not clear what's going on with this message. Like, are you mad at me, Chris? Right? You don't know. That emoji tells you what's going on in my head and in my heart. So we created them because nonverbals are so important to our communication.
Yeah. Yeah. And it elicits a different style of familiarity between the communication that you're providing. Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the future, social engineering, especially. Of course, one thing that I'm very curious about is now we have large language models and they're working fairly well. I think we've seen social engineering at scale in the past. It's happened, but it's the ability to kind of rapidly communicate with an individual, with an interface that feels like another human being, has got to change the dynamics of your work a little bit.
It does extensively. I was at a conference in Spain a couple months ago, and from there was a couple federal agents from Japan. And they were giving a speech, and they said, up till about a year ago, phishing was barely a threat in Japan. And he goes, anyone know why? And I really could not come up with an answer. So no hands went up. A couple people had some guesses, but none of them were right. And he said, the reason is that Russians didn't speak Japanese very well. But now, because of ChatGPT, you can translate any email into a perfect language for another language. I could say, take this message and write it in Japanese, and it will be perfect grammatically. So we're seeing AI being used in phishing. There's a tool out there which just blows my mind. That is a legitimate tool, but it's being used by threat actors because they realize that certain accents will elicit distrust in us as Americans. Someone built an AI-driven tool that removes accents from telemarketers. Now, threat actors are using this. So we don't know they're Indian or from Pakistan or from wherever they're at. They have an American accent. Fraud GPT, if you haven't heard of it, for pennies for the year, you can have access to a fully functional evil version of ChatGPT that writes malware, that writes website code, that will write phishing emails, that will send phishing emails, that will steal credit card data. This thing is unbelievable. So to answer your question, I think what we're going to see, and this is the bad side, then I'll tell you the good side. From the bad side, we're going to see AI being used more and more and more in attacks. That thing in Hong Kong, if you heard about it, the digital skin that this threat actor built, and then he got on a video call with a subordinate of the CFO, but what he was seeing was the CFO, and he said, I need you to transfer $25 million. The guy went and did it. Why not? His boss told him to go do a wire transfer, so he did it. One meeting, and that threat actor now is $25 million. We're going to see this more and more. Okay, now that's all the bad side, and that's all the the negative. What about the good side? I think we're going to start seeing AI being used in more and more in defense. Right? Like I'm right now. We have paperwork out for a number of grants and trying to use AI and LLMs to build defensive models and to helping dictate deception, to understand when malicious intent is being used so we can build better defenses. Because as you kept saying for this whole podcast, we're humans. So we're going to have human reactions. We need to start using the tech because I don't want to teach your people to not be kind and to not have empathy and to be paranoid about every phone call that comes in. I want your customer support people to be as awesome as they are right now. So what I want is technology so your customer support people can be awesome, but we can stop the badness from happening. So I think from both ends, we have to start seeing, AI is already being used on the bad side, but we need to start seeing it being used much more on the positive side.
It's really intriguing idea. I hadn't thought of it where you're literally training a model to have a discussion on a communication channel to try and suss out what the motivations of the communication coming in is. And if you're sensing that they're asking for you to operate a transaction or share data, the machine is going to be a lot less emotionally attached to the communication they're getting. And it is a very powerful defense mechanism. It actually dehumanizes, maybe in an appropriate way, something that could be engineered for a hack.
Well, what's wonderful about it, if you think about it, if we feed that bot the rules for my company, like let's say I'm a bank, and the rules are, I will never ask you for a password, ever. No bank employee will ever ask you for a password. All of a sudden on this call, and I built so much rapport, I'm doing amazing, we're laughing, now we're talking about our kids, our dog, what we're going to eat for dinner. And I'm like, oh, hey, before we log off, I just need to get your password so I can, log this call. That's when the LLM jumps in and maybe a little red light comes up on the screen or something happens on the phone that says, hey, this call may be fraudulent. That question shouldn't have been asked. Enough to break the hijacking of the emotion and bring back critical thought so that the target can go, oh, wait, I can't give you that. I'm sorry, I can't give you that. Right? And it's just a matter of listening to that call, doing the analysis for that intent with your present rule set for your company. And I believe that we can, that's one of the things we're working on now. And I believe that we're going to be able to get there.
Chris, this has been an exceptional conversation.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of the book. Reading it was super helpful for me for thinking about this subject area, helping make our business more secure, and also kind of understanding the mechanics of the psychology of the work. So it's been a real treat to have you, and wish you lots of luck, and looking forward to connecting at some of the conferences I'm sure we attend every year.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. This was a great conversation.